some of the best surveillance operatives in the world are the least innocuous looking people. They're the average Joes. They're the grey men and women. They're the odd shaped people. It kind of sounds like special forces now when I'm talking about people like that.
This is Beer 30, a podcast that connects badass people and shares their experiences over a cold one. Kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. And if you like it, don't forget to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Let's get started with today's episode.
Welcome to another episode of Beer 30, brought to you by UF Pro. I am your host, Tanner Denton, and today we have an Ironman triathlete as well as close protection specialist, Derek Nugent. Derek, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you, Tanner, and thanks for such a warm welcome as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind providing the audience with a little bit of background about yourself and what you currently do, just so we can all get to know you.
So I am currently, it's a little bit complicated. I'm the enterprise technology and training manager for a close protection specialist company called Evolution Global Risk Management. Basically, I run the teams and run the operations. Prior to that, I was working in this industry for about maybe just a little bit over a decade. And before that, I was an infantry NCO in the Irish Defence Forces.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, you've had a long journey through the military service, elite athletics, close protection, and corporate security. When you look back, what is the thread that connects all of those roles? I mean, how did you go from military to being like, you know what, I want to be an elite athlete?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think those two things, they sit together very well because I guess the military should, and all militaries should have high standards. And those standards just kind of turn into lifestyle. The lifestyle where you're running, you're biking, you're swimming, you're gymming, you're putting it all together. I just think they're very, very compatible. The fitter you are, obviously, the easier it is, the more work you can handle. You know, and the first ability for any soldier has to be the ability to endure. And there's nothing like getting into like the most amazing physical shape of your life because you can do great things when you have a uniform on. And you can translate that to stuff outside as well. You know, whatever the sporting endeavor is. And look, me as a kid, I was always chasing a ball, throwing punches, kicking, swimming, riding bikes. I grew up in the country in the middle of nowhere. So like You were walking to the shop. The local shop is a mile away. You could be sent down 3 times a day to get whatever, milk, butter, bread back up. So there was a lot of mileage put in as kids. We didn't really understand the distances were quite as big as they are. And I think that just stuck with me all my life after that.
Okay. Wow. I mean, so did someone approach you about getting into the, I guess, military athletics situation, or did it just come into your head and you were like, yeah, I want to do that?
So I come from a large military family. I had 6 uncles who all served in the military, and I did everything to avoid going into the military, but I was unsuccessful in those endeavors. I kind of, I booted around, I did stuff. And then as a teenager, believe it or not, I joined the reserves in Ireland, right? So like I was like maybe 16, I learned how to march, learned a little bit about the military lifestyle, got to drink some sneaky beers on camp. So it was good. I really enjoyed it. I thought this is the life. This is what it's about. So at 18 then I joined the regular service and I realized, oh God, no, that is not how it is. But I happened to be a good runner as a kid, a very, very strong runner. I ran at a high level. I ran on the track and that was noticed. So in between all the military stuff, I was lumped into the military athletics side of it as well. And at the time, the Irish military was in a state of transition. So originally I probably spent my first maybe 2 years in a tracksuit, living the dream.
Okay.
I think in 1998, I was at the first World Military Cross-Country Championships for the Defence Forces. I made the B team, just about. They were tough, good athletes back then. Very inspiring. And then from there, I thought this was it. I was with the military pentathlon team. It was all the good stuff, yeah. But that changed. And the restructure meant then we kind of lost a little bit of that. But I got to do really, really cool, interesting stuff afterwards. So yeah, quite happy with that.
That's great. What did you run in track and cross country? What events?
So everything. I as a kid I ran I was a nice 400 meter runner. I was a decent 800 meter runner.
Awesome.
I ran to, like, I'm not bragging here. This is how it was back in the day. I ran what was an Olympic B standard, but they probably measured it with a car. The course was probably a bit short, truth be told. But I was a pretty good 10K runner as well, so not the best, but I just had that never give up, never, on my shoulder carrying an attitude. That's how I rolled, I got more out of the ones where I was lying on the ground, pancaked after it. Like, that was just an enormous sense of well-being when that's how things roll, Yeah, very good.
Absolutely. I was a 200 and 400 guy through high school and college. So the 400 and 800 are a man's race for sure. So I know how that is.
They are. And I have to be open books with you here. I'm a small guy, but I've got like maybe full of piss and vinegar. So I was always up for a scrap. I initially started out boxing as a youth, and we used to have to run to make weight. And I was probably better at the running than the boxing. So I was like, yeah, you know what? Using my face to defeat people instead of my fists wasn't always a good idea. So I stuck with the running, and from there, it kind of just took off. But that was sort of it. Then when I went into the military, then the unit I went into had a really big tradition in sports, and they molded me. They actually really put the time in. I got like the best of guys around me, people, better, a little bit, at the same level, that had been more experienced, and it was just a really good environment to learn. And of course, it was a hands down infantry unit. So like, this was the side hustle, because the bread and butter stuff was what we did, when we were in the field. Like, so really, really cool.
Yeah. Great. So how does the military and athletics go into close protection and corporate security?
Yeah, so it was kind of strange. The military had a different attitude in the late 90s back here. And then it was restructured around 1999, 2000. And that restructuring kind of was, they cut a lot of funding from the sports stuff. So a lot of us then, were this is our job, this is what we do. So we had a little bit less of that. I had somehow, not quite sure, gotten involved in multi-sport because I couldn't really make my mind up. I was always doing something. I was never the best, but I was always just stuck in there, pretty okay at it as well. And that's where the love affair with long distance stuff kind of started. I made national squads in, triathlon when I was very, very young, but also, whilst trying to maintain a full-time career as a military, serving soldier. So it was tricky. Kind of from there, then I got involved, like I said, in triathlon. I raced at a high level. I raced at an elite level. I raced internationally a couple of times. I sucked, but I turned up and went hard. And then from there, I developed an injury in my foot, and it coincided with an event happening locally. And the people that were organizing the event had no kind of elite inside input. So they approached me and they said, hey, what do you think about this from the course design? You've raced at an elite level. And I said, oh, this is good, but this bit here, not so good. So we ended up, that's how the conversation started. And a few years later, then I was the technical director for the European Triathlon Championships. So I had 6,000 athletes, 120 TV channels, and it went out live. It was the largest triathlon event outside of mainland Europe, in Europe at the time. So yeah, that's the thing. If you find an infantryman who's got 5 minutes to spare, just throw something at him and who knows what happens, They can get stuff done.
Yeah. So what originally drew you into the world of security and risk management?
So yeah, I did a lot. I guess, I was a long time in the military, pretty long. And in our military, we get to you wear many different hats over the space of your career. Everything from early on, we do a whole bunch of weapons. It's not just, we don't just specialize with, a small number, like you're on, .5s one week, you're a young entry mortar the next, you're a recce the week after, not the week, but you do an ILSW, you're doing it never stops, and that's a good thing, So you do all that, and then you might get promoted, you might go overseas. There might be an area that you want to work in, whether that's in, a different unit if you want to move more towards engineering or whatever. Yeah, I suppose just across the whole range of time, and with the bank of overseas tours I did, I think I kind of came into the sphere of people who had work outside the military. Now, you're kind of moonlighting that stuff. I don't really think it's a grey area. In Ireland, we had a really bad recession. A lot of us were working 2 or 3 jobs to keep the lights on at home, because our pay was cut drastically. I mean, more than 30% in my case. And, my then wife, like, she wasn't paid at all. So a lot of people struggled for a lot of time, and a lot of us ended up taking up other work. So, you could work on the doors, you could work as a bouncer, you could whatever. People just did what they had to do to make ends meet. I ended up being kind of sort of maybe headhunted a little bit by a company. And they came down and they met me and they offered me some PSD work. And the PSD work was at the time, a very contested country. And I just come back from a very contested country. And I was like, well, look, I'm honored that you thought about me, but I don't know this team. And I know that area is very, very non-permissive. So I'm not really going to just jump into this and go, because I really need to know the guys. So thanks, but no thanks. And this guy was like, nobody says no to this. The money was huge, So I think he kind of he did a reassessment of me. So he said, hey, look, how would you like to do some work for us here in Ireland? Instead, we'll start you off on some basic enough stuff like, a little bit of surveillance work or covert surveillance or covert protection, a little bit of key holding, keeping an eye on people, keeping an eye on things. And I guess just like everything else in my career, the more you give me to do and you let me kind of grow, I grow. And I grew into it. And I went from doing that up to ultimately ending on an RST, a residential security team, everything from security driver right up to being like full-time team member, working with, some super, super wealthy people who had, I guess they had the need for the right kind of people around them. They needed people that didn't necessarily look like hulking monsters, that could fit in around a board meeting, that could hold a conversation, that are multilingual, that have a small bit of learning and wouldn't embarrass them in a corporate setting. And that's somehow that I kind of eventually figured that out. And yeah, that's kind of how I ended up doing it. Now, here's the thing. Ultimately, the career in the military has to come to an end. And when it came to an end, then I worked as a private contractor, kind of just plying my trade on the teams out there, just like all the other boys and girls who are farming LinkedIn, who are farming their connections, who are putting it out there and looking for a little bit of work. I started off doing that. And then from there, I was with a very great company and they were really, really good. And when I teach the courses, Tanner, you'll have to forgive me, right? So when I teach close protection courses, I always tell people every principal I've ever looked after has died. And people are like, that's the worst thing, close protection. I'm like, no, of old age. I need to be clear about this. They all die of old age, guys. That's the job, right? And that's how it should be. But it just so happened that this particular family, that particular principal, due to old age, she passed on, and Lord rest her kind soul, she was a lady. So I was a free agent and I got picked up by another company, and that's where I've been ever since.
Wow. That is great. I mean, so you mentioned you were in the military for a long time. So 22 years, is that correct?
Yeah.
And it was as an infantry NCO, and you deployed everywhere from Lebanon to Syria. What were some of the biggest lessons from those years in the military that you still use today in the private sector?
Some of them are kind of obvious, like that the job's not done until it's done. The finish line isn't the end of a lot of things that you do. No plan, no matter how good. Yeah, all you can do is plan as best you can, because the minute you get stuck in, things will change. So you have to be agile. They're definitely things that I feel that we bring across. Another thing is that we've had some really, really shitty days on deployment, really boring days, which, they're bad. And
Yeah.
really, really days where you're not quite sure if you're going to ever get home or see your loved ones again. And sometimes it's always the military guys standing on work that we always kind of look at each other and we go, but nobody's shooting at us, right? So we're not doing too bad, you know. And then there's always one to go, yeah, but maybe if they were, it could be a bit more exciting, right? And you're like, no, no. But, we romanticize, we look back and romanticize about how it was. But no, you wouldn't have to spend a lot of time on a task or a deployment to remember, a lot of it sucked too,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So when you were in the military, you mentioned you competed as a military elite athlete, even at the military Olympic level. How did that experience influence your mindset and performance under pressure for what you use today?
Yeah, so I guess, look, it's funny, right? Because you find yourself like, when I think back, like my first tour overseas, I was in Lebanon, right? We did I think it was about 8 months. 6 months were really hot. And then, there was a lot of stuff going on between Israel and Hezbollah at the time in southern Lebanon. And then like for the next 5 months, then it was like nothing happening. A lot of people can identify with that. So we ran around the camp. We ran and we just got fit. We got strong, and you come home and then there's there's in-house military competitions, and you do your best, you try and make the team, and you just run a bit more. Next thing you're like me, then you're back overseas again, and you're you know depending on what it is your role out there, you might have a 6 to 8 month training camp, or you might be stuck in the trenches for 6 to 8 months. It really
Yeah.
it's whatever it is, but the mindset's the same. You train when you can. And it's funny because we always talk about when we go overseas, we come back and it's like we're like just chiseled. We're carved out of rich mahogany. We're these amazing looking specimens, 4% body fat, like eight packs. And you're kind of going like,
Yeah.
yeah, but you have the very same number of hours at home and the ability to eat the very same calories and the ability to do the very same training. But it only seems to be when you deploy, you actually get the finger out and get it done. But having said that, there's nothing like an impending championship race, 9 or 10 months away to actually be the stick that you might need to motivate you to. Yeah.
Yeah. You worked extensively with ultra high net worth individuals now. What does the public misunderstand about close protection work, do you think?
I think that the canned images of the guys in the black suits with the white shirt, the black shades, and they all look like the not so secret service, and it's not even an image problem. It's just how it is. It's how people perceive us. And one of the things I bring to what we do is that I do a lot of personality matching. So I'm making sure we have the right boys and girls with the right people. And you have to remember, these people they're in a different space. They move through a different world. And we've got a job to do, and it's an important job as well. And you can never downplay the importance of what it is that we're actually doing. I use the Irish approach. I laugh and joke through life and everything, but I still get the job done. And we could, when it's time to be serious, it's serious. But by and large, like, if people think that we're these lurking, gigantic, I don't know, 320 pound, 6'8" with no neck, there is a role for those guys too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there is a job for them. But I've had a lot of people, household celebrities, who don't like people that are taller than them. I don't like, don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of men that make me look like the smallest guy in the room. You can guess who I'm talking about when I'm saying that name. And so we got to be sensitive around this, or we have other people and they're resistant to it. And the resistance is maybe they have the incorrect image. So when I teach people, I always tell everybody, it takes all shapes and sizes to do this. Some of the best surveillance operatives in the world, they're the least, innocuous looking people. They're the average Joes. They're the grey men and women. They're the odd shaped people. It kind of sounds like special forces now when I'm talking about people like that it's literally the last person you'd expect. And they're most likely going to be the person that's doing it. And that's something that I think a lot of people get wrong. Don't get me wrong, too. The skills are super, super important. But yeah, the product that you are, that is a product. And sometimes people might second guess coming into the industry because they're like, I'm not big enough, or I don't think I'm this enough, or whatever, So I always say, let me have a look at you. There's a place for you somewhere, and there is, yeah. Because think about it, really, really good teams, really well developed teams. Like I've been the advance. I've been that guy. My job is to stay a day or 2 or 3 days or even half an hour in front of the principal. And I am running around in a hire car, trying to get it parked, running in and out, trying to vet the building, get it done. They might only see me at the end of the mission. We all shake hands and good luck. But that could be you. You could be the follow car. You might be the person sitting in the operations room. You could be the surveillance or counter surveillance team. There's a whole bunch of jobs. And like I said, don't hold yourself back because you don't think just because I'm not 6'4". Well, I'm still waiting to get to be 6'4", but it doesn't look likely at this stage.
Yeah, I just had a thought. So have you ever had a principal with, I mean, you mentioned they can be very particular, even down to they don't want someone to be taller than them whenever they're walking around. What could be a very problematic or annoying thing that your principal could do that could make your job way, way harder than it should ever be?
Ooh, well, I mean, I ended up in a favela in Rio, which was really not cool. It's interesting to chat over a beer with the guys I was with. But one of our principals got us in there. That was definitely not on the bingo card list. Here's the thing, Tanner, right? When we teach our boys and girls, right, we teach them the skills and drills to blend in. Don't cough, don't blink, don't sniff, don't fart, don't smell too much of anything. Don't be fidgety, don't be on your phone. We give them all the skills and drills. So they're just, you only speak when you're spoken to. And when you're spoken to and there's a conversation, obviously you reply. I mean, you don't be a dick. But, we work on us because we can control us. We can't control the principal. I've had a principal who didn't like turning left in the vehicle, and you're like, wow, very tricky around a lot of major cities. Particularly US cities laid out in a grid format. Not too bad around Europe where it's just like, higgly-piggly roads. But just did not want to turn left. And you'd know about it. He'd be pretty pissed off if we had to make a couple of left turns. Another guy did not like being in traffic. He would get out of the car, start walking. So
that would be a nightmare.
Got to have your dancing shoes on. You're going for a walk in the middle of rush hour in the middle of Paris. Yeehaw, giddy up. So I'm just saying, like, these, it is what it is, But by and large, a lot of them are amazing people. I had another guy as well. He was like, that old Chuck Norris joke. He doesn't know what time it is. He decides it, This guy did not work to the schedule of anybody. He'd like get out of bed at 11 p.m. and we'd be pulling all-nighters. Now, we're pulling all days and all nights. And we were pancaked. It was just attritional. So then that's where the military stuff comes in and you're like, just suffer it out. Like, nobody's shooting at me. It's not getting blown up today. I'm just tired, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what goes into planning and leading security teams for an event where there could be 10,000 to 100,000 people in one location?
I mean, look, I can give you a few examples. A lot of what I do right now is events because that's where a lot of these people like to go. I mean, sometimes they might be the title sponsor to these huge events. I mean, I was in Paris for the Olympics, right? So I was there at that whole program for 3 weeks, working on task for 3 weeks, but obviously a little before. And, it took months to get us there. A lot of networking, which we'd be strong in Paris anyhow. We know a lot of the companies, but we were like the team I was with. We were responsible for a few different layers. So strategically, we're responsible for a board and for some very important people on the board. Because if one of them has a slip, trip, or fall, I mean, the stock market drops by points. So you got to be mindful that little old you from working class wherever, you've got a big job to do. So you pony up and get it done. So you've got that to think of. And then you've got the wider group that's with them. So maybe that group of 5 that you're paying very close attention to, they've got a group of about 250. Now it gets a little bit more complicated and they've brought 8,000 guests. So yes, now you're kind of going like, right. So this is where you've got to be more than just a guy and a girl in a suit. This is where you've got to put on your big boy britches. You're a security risk manager now. You've got to think strategic. You've got to understand, everything about the event needs to be known. Where are we going? Where are we going when things go bad? How do we get there? If we really need to get there, how, worst case scenario, how does it work? And interestingly enough, we actually had a very serious event happen in Paris a couple of years ago. I'm just mentioning Paris because clearly Paris is where it's happening. But it basically a couple of years ago at the Champions League final, which is soccer, I don't know if you know it or you're interested, but two teams were playing, and one of the teams was a team from London. And they came over because, Paris and London, you could come on a train and, under the channel, you can fly in. So it was really well attended by all these people from the United Kingdom. But when they got to the stadium, the modern system now, your electronic ticket activates on your phone, when you're within Bluetooth range of the gates, and then you're in, right? But the system didn't work. So now we had maybe 60, 70,000 French fans. And the French fans and the English fans from Arsenal and the French police clashed. And it was cool, right? It was full on riot squad, tear gas, shop fronts being ripped apart. It was just mayhem everywhere. And we had to get our board members out. And it was only at that point then they realized, and they said it to us afterwards, "I'm not quite sure what we're paying you guys, but it is whatever you need, you get." Because then they got to see that we're the quiet professionals, we're a safe pair of hands, we're always trying to make ourselves useful. But in an event like that where the guidance was shelter in place, but that guidance to a regular group makes sense, but to us we knew that where our cars were parked is a hidden entrance, right? Nobody knows about it, and it kind of brings out on a back alley. We're we just go to the cars and we're out of here. We're literally, straight out the gap. And we're right, we make the decision, let's get it done. So we did. So we had a big team. We had our guys were down there, our advance were down there, and we literally just beat our way out of the stadium, which was kind of bad for the local kind of hired in on the day event security. We didn't take any crap. But it needs to be done. And so that's the kind of thing that can go wrong or where it can happen. But it's very, very rare. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like definitely, an event, I wouldn't say gone wrong, but gone wrong. What are do you have sort of a tier list of what a good event, that you would think would be a breeze, would be down to an event where you'd be okay, this is a nightmare?
In advance of an event? Or
so if something came up, say an example at the top of your list that would be the easiest, a yacht party. At the bottom of your list would be what you just described that happened in Paris.
Yeah, I would flip them, Tanner. People are better behaved in big public spaces when it's a corporate branded thing. The issue is never the guests, our guests really. Sometimes people tie it on a little bit too much, but it's very, very rare because you remember, these are corporate creatures, right? They're they're connected to deep, wide wealth, and it's their jobs. They can enjoy themselves, but a slip up there could be a very permanent slip up. Interestingly enough, the yacht thing came up this year, so yeah, you got to remember now. You could have 6 or 7 guys renting out a yacht, a lot of money, a lot of attitude, a lot of alcohol, and I will be honest here. Our company's policy is very, very clear, right? We typically don't do a huge amount with celebrities. Of course, we work with celebrities, but we're always very cautious. I don't put any of our boys and girls in a place where they'll interact with something where they have to make a judgment call. So if there's drug use or if there's something that is illegal or unethical, if they see it, I don't want our people to have to be involved in that and then kind of go I didn't like it, but I just shut up because I didn't want to cause it, whatever. So our management process is simple. We if I'm there and I see it and it's not what we're at, right, team, we're out here. It's not what we're about. They're clearly not the client we thought they were. We don't accept it off our operators. We would never stand over it happening when we're on a task. So that kind of protects us a little bit from some of the fuckery that can be out there. We're not that money hungry. Like, we don't need those kind of clients. But, we found that we have great relationships with people. But sometimes when you get a lot of guys or girls and there's drink and they don't really understand that we're there to provide this type of service, we have had incidents where people kind of maybe stray a little bit, but it's normally in that environment. And it was, interestingly enough, a yacht. And I think I've said enough on that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go too deep into it. Lastly, what advice would you give to someone that may pursue a career in executive protection or risk management today?
Yeah, okay. So what I would always encourage people to do is have a look at what you've done in your background, right? It's super helpful if you serve in the military. It's super helpful if you serve in the police. It's super, super helpful if you have an up-to-date medical qualification. If you've got any of those things, they're helpful. They're a good starting point. They're not everything, because maybe you went to school or high school, you became an intelligence analyst, whatever. Like, don't think you're limited to come into the industry if you haven't done a service type. There's loads of ways in. The other thing I would say is be mindful of where you get your training. Like in Europe, right? We typically, weapons and the carriage of weapons, it's different over here. So the training reflects that, right? Obviously in the States, completely different, and you do exactly what you need to do out there, and that's completely acceptable. Neither of those modes of training are incorrect. They're region specific. And it's important to understand that wherever you train, that might be region specific. If you deploy somewhere, have some consideration about where you're going, and that can really, really help you when you get there. And that's what we try to do. Like, we have regional teams, we have big international teams, we deploy globally. There's nowhere that we're not mobile in. And a lot of what we do from our own backgrounds, like, I spent a lot of time in West Africa, a lot of time in the Middle East, huge amount of time around Europe, is understanding each market and what works there, and then making sure that you're a good fit for there.
That's great, because it's, completely different, like you said, completely different, just ways that people go about their business in different countries. So yeah, I can definitely see how in Europe, when you're training for your specific job, it would be completely different here in the States, because it's a completely different culture. Yeah. Well, Derek, thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the listeners do too. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Beer 30. As always, stay on the lookout for more episodes wherever you choose to listen.
So there you have it. This concludes another episode of UF Pro's Beer 30 podcast. Want more information about UF Pro and tactical clothing for professional end users? Then please visit ufpro.com or follow our channels on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.